Devin Bennett, 20 years on death row. In February 2003, Bennett was found guilty of capital murder in Rankin County and given the death penalty for felony child abuse, which resulted in the death of his 2-month-old son, Brandon Bennett. In June 2000, Devin Bennett and Yolanda Lewis had a son, Brandon Allen Bennett. Bennett brought Brandon to River Oaks Hospital 2 months later on August 25, 2000 at 8:45 a.m. Nurse Colette Moreland removed Brandon from Bennett, observing that the infant was pale, cold, and not breathing. According to medical documents, Brandon was asystolic, which means he didn't have a pulse or a heartbeat. When the hospital team questioned Bennett about what had happened to Brandon, he replied that he woke up at 4 that morning and saw that Brandon had seemingly slipped from his car seat onto the floor. This was the first of Bennett's at least 7 accounts of what transpired before Brandon passed away. Baby Brandon had multiple bruises and injuries that led the authorities to believe he had shaken baby syndrome, and this was ultimately his cause of death. Anthony Carr, 33 years on death row. Robert Simon, 33 years on death row. Carl Parker, his wife Bobby Jo, and their 2 children, Gregory, age 12, and Charlotte, age 9, left the Riverside Baptist Church in Clarksdale on Friday, February 2, 1990, and headed back to their house on Highway 322 in rural Quitman County, which was about 15 miles away from Clarksdale. The Parkers were last observed that evening between 8:45 and 9:15 p.m., leaving the church. While traveling east on the highway at approximately 11 p.m., Billy King noticed a fire at the Parker residence. Mr. King attempted to enter the house through the unlocked carport door, but the fire forced him to retreat. In order to get assistance, Mr. King drove to the closest neighbor's house after leaving the Parkers' home. On his route to the neighbor's house, King did not pass any cars. However, when he turned around at the neighbor's front door to face the Parkers' residence, he noticed 2 cars leaving the Parkers' home and heading west. Joe McCullough was traveling on the highway east as King was at the neighbor's house attempting to get assistance. In his deposition, McCullough said there were 2 cars that were rapidly approaching Clarksdale while tailgating. He recognized the Silverado pickup truck as the lead car. Between 11 and 11:20 p.m., Lambert Volunteer Fire Department fireman Jerry Wages received a call reporting the Parkers' fire. He located Carl Parker's body and then returned inside the residence and retrieved Gregory and Charlotte's bodies. Wages remembered that Carl and Gregory had their wrists tied behind their backs, and they were shackled at the ankles and feet. Charlotte's wrist still had a piece of binding on it. Beneath her dress, Charlotte had no clothes on below her waist. Wages reported that she also had a cut on her hip. After the fire was eventually put out, Bobby Jo Parker's body was found in the early hours of the morning. Her body, which had been severely charred, was discovered in the southwest corner of the home. On February 2nd of 1990, Martha Simon, the wife of Robert Simon, had left Memphis and gone to Clarksdale to visit her mother. She added that for the last 3 weeks, Carr had been residing in their Memphis apartment with her and Robert. On February 3rd, 1990, at around 12:30 a.m., Martha noticed Carr strolling down the street while she was in her car. Carr inquired as to whether Martha had seen Robert. In response, Martha said she believed Carr and Robert had been together. Carr was asked how he arrived in town. In response, he said he was driving a truck and gestured in the general direction of the Parker truck's later discovery. Carr informed her that the vehicle had stuff in it and that he parked it on the 9th Street. He mentioned to Martha that he had some cash as well. He informed her where he had hidden some coveralls in a dumpster and that he had left the truck's keys beside the railroad lines. A sealed dumpster close to Martha Simon's mother-in-law's Clarksdale home yielded a pair of coveralls and a pair of work gloves, thanks to information provided by Simon to Coahoma County Sheriff Andrew Thompson, Jr. The coveralls had a smoky odor and were damp. Dean Parker, Carl Parker's son, recognized the gloves as being the identical kind he had given his father. The shotgun that was discovered in the truck had Carr's fingerprint on it. 2 arrest warrants were issued in Marks, Mississippi on February 3, 1990. That day, at approximately 3:30 p.m., Anthony Carr and Robert Simon Jr. were taken into custody in Clarksdale. Pathologist Dr. Stephen Hain provided testimony regarding the circumstances behind each Parker family member's death. Following 2 gunshot wounds, Carl and Gregory both passed away. Bobby Jo was shot to death, her body completely charred beyond recognition, and just 1 bullet was found. Young Charlotte was shot 3 times, and she eventually died from smoke inhalation. She had also been essayed, and ultimately that was the reason Carr decided to murder the entire family and burn the house down to make sure no evidence against him would be found. Leslie Galloway, 13 years on death row. Galloway was convicted by the jury of essaying Shaquilla Anderson in December 2008. After severing her throat, he lit her ablaze and ran a car over her. It was the most graphic crime scene that an investigator had ever seen. The victim was a student at Harrison Central High School. A few days after her death, hunters in DeSoto National Forest found her body. According to expert witnesses, remnants of her body were discovered beneath Galloway's mother's Ford Taurus. Kelvin Jordan, 27 years on death row. On October 5, 1995, Jordan and Frontrell Edwards were found guilty and given the death penalty for the murders of Tony Roberts and his 2-year-old son, Cordera Bradley. Jordan and Edwards made a stop at Pachutazamoco gas station. After approaching the father and son, Roberts offered to drive the 2 men to a Heidelberg ball game. On October 8, 1995, Roberts' 1987 Nissan was discovered burning in a dirt pit close to Rose Hill. The bodies of Roberts and his son were discovered on Highway 11 next to the train tracks, 2 miles below the Barnett settlement. The infant had been shot once and the father multiple times. Authorities eventually found the rifle in a Jasper County pond. Tong Lee, 21 years on death row. Following the beating and strangulation deaths of Min Hyu Thi Hyun and her 2 daughters, 10, then 15, and Thuy, then 11, Tong Lee and Gan Tran were charged with capital murder. While being held in detention, Gan Tran, the man who was thought to have carried out the real killings, committed suicide. After a trial, Lee received a death by lethal injection sentence. The state evidence at Lee's trial demonstrated that the 2 had gone to Quinn's house with the intention of robbing her. The kids, who were by themselves at home, let the 2 enter the apartment. Upon Quinn's return, she and the kids had been brutally assaulted, chained, and strangled to death. Lee and Tran tried using water and bleach to cleanse the area for hours. Along taking $1,300 in cash, the 2 also took a book bag filled with home goods. Eric Moffett, 30 years on death row. In the early hours of December 31, 1994, Felicia Griffin was essayed, beaten, and killed. Felicia shared a home in Jackson with her mother Penny Griffin, her 2 sisters, and Moffett. Moffett was Penny's boyfriend. Moffett, Penny, and the 3 girls were home on December 30, 1994. Around 9:45 p.m., Moffett departed the house as Penny was getting ready for work. Penny anticipated that Florence Moffett Powell, Moffett's mother, would arrive shortly to drive her to work. Before departing, Penny made sure the kids were okay and secured the door and burglar's bars. Powell stopped by Penny's house, picked her up at the gas station, and drove her to work. Sharita stated in her deposition that she had gone with Powell and had seen him go into the residence in search of Penny. Powell passed away before the trial, therefore she did not testify. Evidence was presented to the jury indicating that Moffett went back to the residence a few hours later, dragged Felicia into the bedroom, abused her, and viciously essayed her by using his fingers and fist. Felicia was just 5 years old. Tommy Terrell Clark, 5 years on death row. Fad Saed and his 13-year-old son Muhammad were co-workers at Fad's convenience store in Canton, Mississippi on the evening of October 27, 2014. At the age of 13, Fad left Yemen in the 1990s to relocate to the United States. He grew up in California, working at convenience stores with his parents. After moving to Canton, he kept working there until he could afford to establish his own business, which he called Fat Boy. While Fad's wife and 2 daughters resided in Yemen, Fad and Muhammad lived at the back of the shop. At around 10:10 p.m. on that particular evening, Fad was seated right behind Muhammad at the cash register, talking on FaceTime with Muhammad's mother in Yemen. Just as Muhammad was wrapping up a deal with Marcus Sanderson, a frequent customer, Clark and his nephew Teonta Clark walked into the store. No other customers were in the store at the time. Clark approached Muhammad silently and fired a single point-blank bullet to the left side of his head, instantly taking his life. The gun jammed when Clark tried to shoot Fudd. Immediately, Clark moved around the service counter, racked the slide of the revolver, and aimed it at Fudd's head. Fudd was able to dislodge the gun. After inflicting Fudd a gunshot wound to the stomach, Clark commanded him to give it up. Clark approached the cash register, climbing on top of Muhammad's body and snatching his cell phone with his downward reach. After asking Teonta where Fudd had stashed the store's cash, Clark made an effort to access the register. A car pulled up to the business at that precise moment. After Teonta informed Clark, the two men took Muhammad's cell phone and exited the store. Once the two women got out of the car and entered the business, they discovered that Muhammad's body was laying on the ground. One of the women made the quick decision to call 911. Authorities identified Teonta and Clark as suspects right away. As he was exiting the store, Anderson, who knew both Clark and Teonta, noticed the two men entering. When Anderson heard the first shot, he fled from where he was standing outside the business, where Clark had just shot Muhammad. Later that evening, he went to the police station to provide an official statement. Fudd knew Teonta and Clark as well. Clark had occasionally shopped at the business, and Teonta was a regular customer. At the trial, Fudd named Clark as the gunman. Authorities obtained footage from the store's 7 security cameras, which provided the most incriminating evidence in the case. The footage showed Clark and Teonta entering the store and Clark killing Muhammad. Additionally, Clark was seen on the camera snatching Muhammad's phone behind the counter and attempting to open the cash register. 1 week later, in Dallas, Texas, Clark and Teonta were taken into custody. Alberto Julio Garcia, 6 years on death row. Garcia was sentenced to death for the murder of 5-year-old Janaa Thompson. On July 16, 2014, Janaa vanished from her home in Gulfport, Mississippi. Her mother and other family members started looking for Janaa at their apartment complex and quickly moved to the neighborhood. After Janaa vanished, her relatives came to Garcia's house to ask whether he had seen the young child. He told the family he had not seen her, looking them in their eyes. Garcia was among the several neighbors who joined the search. The day after she vanished, police discovered her body hanging by her neck in a rat-infested trailer, with a pair of socks dangling from a window crank 50 feet from her house. In order to spare his mother from hearing about and seeing the evidence used against him in court, Garcia admitted to the killing. Willie Cory Godbolt, 3 years on death row. 8 individuals were killed in May 2017, and Willie Cory Godbolt was found guilty. Godbolt had an argument with his ex-wife regarding their children on May 27, 2017, when he went to his in-law's house. He murdered a deputy, his mother-in-law, and 2 others. 2 young people were slain in a second residence early the following day, and a married couple was slain in a third house. Godbolt's stepmother killed his father with a gun when he was just 17 years old, which left him with enormous anger and resentment directed especially towards women. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.